I am Sandeep Pawar. I'm a principal program manager at Microsoft. Been with Microsoft, I would say maybe it's been 6, 8 months, something like that. So relatively new. Prior to that, I was a Microsoft MVP for Power BI and Fabric, and I worked in consulting for many years. I write a blog at fabric.guru. So check out if you are interested in learning about Fabric. I also am a co-lead for Vancouver Fabric and Power BI User Group. I live in Portland, but one of my friend, he lives in Vancouver. He pretty much runs it, and I support him. In fact, I think we have a user group meeting today or tomorrow. I don't remember, but we have sometime this week. I won't be able to make it. But yeah. Fabric Data Agent. So on the Power BI CAT team or the Fabric CAT team, CAT is the customer advisory team, and we sit between the customers, the enterprise customers, and the product engineering group. And I'm part of the product engineering group, but my focus is primarily working with customers, especially really large customers, and then helping them succeed with Fabric in general. But my focus is primarily on AI ML experiences within Fabric, and Data Agent is one of those things. And Data Agent is really hot right now. I spend a lot of time talking to customers and speaking with users about Data Agents. Just a couple of weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago, right around the FabCon, which happened in March 28th or so, my friend Parv Chana, he and we launched this website, fabricdataagent.com. And let me show you, actually. I think I have it open somewhere. Yep, there you go. So it's a Fabric Data Agent is a community hub. It's an open source website. Obviously, you can see it. It's all wipe coded, but built with purpose and built with a lot of functions. So on the left side here, you'll see articles related to Fabric Data Agent, the videos, LinkedIn posts about Data Agent, resources, which includes GitHub resources, tools like notebooks or any other thing that I see in the community, and then learning paths and bunch of other things. If you come across any resource that you think others in the community, others in users would benefit from, then hit the contribute button, and you just submit a form. And that's pretty much it. There is nothing much required. So definitely check it out, and also bookmark it. So as you start on your Fabric Data Agent journey, this will be one place where you can check out everything. Some level setting here, right? So for Fabric, within Fabric, there are many AI-powered experiences, right? So if you open a Fabric notebook, there is a Copilot there. If you go to a data warehouse, there is a Copilot there. And if you use Microsoft in general, Microsoft products in general, there is a Copilot in pretty much everything, right? So that's not what we're talking about here. What we are going to talk about specifically is the chat with your data experience within Fabric. So that includes the data that resides in your OneLake. OneLake is where all your data, enterprise data lives. And how can you use AI on top of that? Now, I've called out chat with your data experience here, but there is another piece that I'll just mention, but we won't be covering that. That's the operations agent, which is the operational intelligence layer in Fabric. The difference is data agent is, as the name suggests, you chat with your data. Whereas the operations agent is more autonomous AI agents that are used to autonomously track the data in real-time hub and event houses, and then act on top of those insights that are generated. But we're here for chat with your data only. So what's the goal with a data agent, right? So the goal here is creating virtual analysts which can help answer questions that are related to the data. So if we look at it at a very high level, like what is a Fabric Data Agent, we'll start from the very bottom on the left-hand side, where you have the data that lives in Fabric OneLake that includes your lake houses, warehouses, semantic model, event house, KQLDBs, and the list keeps growing. This slide is, I want to say, maybe like 3, 4 months ago. But now we also support mirror DBs, AI search, which includes unstructured data. We also support ontologies, graph. So any data, enterprise data that lands in Fabric, you can use that in data agent. Um, then as a creator, you have multiple different options, right? The very first one, now I'm sure all of you use AI in some way or fashion in your everyday life. And as you know, I mean, this has been true for forever. Garbage in, garbage out, but you get more garbage out with LLM, right? But the way to make insights out of that and get the signals out of your data is the context, and that really what separates a data agent from your generic, let's say, ChatGPT or M365 Copilot or Claude. This is where you define your context, you configure the data agent with your business domain expertise, and then add that knowledge to the data agent so that it can answer the question. You also have multiple tools that are available that can help you create these data agents, publish these data agents, and validate these data agents. And once all of this is done, then you publish it. And I'll show you what the experience looks like, but I just wanted to give you an overall idea. Now, what separates the Fabric data agents that are there are tons of different data agents that are available out there, right? So what separates a Fabric data agent from the others is the Microsoft ecosystem. We are completely interoperable and composable. So once you create a data agent, you can publish it, and it's available natively as an item, as an artifact within the Fabric platform. So users can go there and then chat with your data right in the Fabric workspace. Or if you want to extend that further with more data, more agents, or even more data agents, then you can use Azure AI Foundry if you want to use a more pro code approach. But if you are somebody who's just getting started, and then Copilot Studio would be the right place in that case. And then you can use Azure AI Foundry and then Copilot Studio to add more knowledge sources on top of this data agents, and then publish it to teams as well. So very seamlessly, you or your colleagues, your coworkers who can use the data agent in teams where they would just chat like it's another person, this virtual analyst. It's also available in M365 Copilot. And then again, just like the data sources, the consumption experience keeps on growing with more integrations. We also have APIs that are available. We also have MCP servers. So when you create a data agent, it automatically creates an MCP server, hosted MCP server, which can be used in any other external application. There is a Python SDK as well that's available if you're more into Python notebooks and need more programmability. So that's what the data integrate the overall Fabric data agent looks like. Now, from end-to-end perspective, how does it work, right? So first and foremost, when you create a data agent, you're always within the security boundary of Fabric workspace. So the capacity that you use, that's the capacity that's attached to the data agent. Also, when you use any of these data sources, the security permissioning always is enforced based on who you are. So if you go to a workspace, you're a viewer, and you won't be able to create a data agent there. Same thing if you're a contributor, but if you have access to a lot of data in OneLake, but within those data lake, within the OneLake, if there are certain tables that you don't have access to within the lakehouse, or maybe even a column in a semantic model, or certain rows, then that is also enforced. So by design, the data agent, it does not have any security options. It always resides at the data layer. So you always define, which is always the best practice. You always define your security where the data is, so you don't have to again worry about it. Then you add your data sources, like I said, configure it with instructions, which we will look at, and then example queries, which help you ground the data, ground the agents more, and then publish it, and then consume it via various different mechanisms. So creating the data agent, right? So before we go into the nitty-gritties and the super technical details, by the way, when the this session, I assume that you know what Fabric is. Now, if we have people here and attendees who don't know what Fabric is and need me to spend a few minutes on it, happy to do that. But what I was intending to do was go into more super technical details about how a data agent works, and then how do you configure a data agent correctly to get the most out of it. But happy to change it if you the attendees feel that you need to I need to spend more time on in something else.
How about we get a show of hands?
Yeah.
Who would like a little quick refresher, or if you need a refresher, raise your hand. I am on the side of I would love the technical deep dive, but that's just me. Please be honest. It's totally cool. Anybody else need a little refresher?
Okay, so I saw one hand up, which is still important. So I'll spend a few minutes just so that you're aware what Fabric looks like and what it is and everything. So to go to Fabric, you go to fabric.microsoft.com. You have to have Fabric is a SaaS platform, SaaS meaning software as a service, as opposed to platform as a service. In the old days, and that would be before 3 years ago, if you had to create if you had data engineering job, let's say you're a Power BI developer and you needed to bring data in, you would go to Azure and then you would provision things like Azure Data Factory or use Databricks or use Synapse, and then piece all these things together, and then land the data and then consume and then create Power BI semantic model on top of the data that resides somewhere in like ADLS Gen 2 or somewhere. What Fabric does is it brings all those technologies and a lot more into one single platform so that depending on your business goals, depending on your project goals, and depending also who you are and what your skill levels are, you have all the tools that are available within one ecosystem. So just like Power BI, you have the Fabric workspace, and a Fabric workspace, you go new item, and there are a ton of different items that you have available. So there are items that help you get the data. There are items that help you store the data. There are items that help you prepare the data, analyze the data, develop the data, track the data, and then the list just keeps on growing, right? There are lots and lots and lots of other things here. Now, for you to get started with a data agent, what you will need is a premium capacity, so which is a Fabric capacity or Power BI Premium. If you already have Power BI Premium, then you can do that, and then you need to be a workspace contributor, which means when you go to a workspace, there is a manage access. And right now I'm an admin, but you need to be at least a contributor to be able to create a data agent. And then there are in the tenant settings. So if you don't see a data agent, if you go click on new item and then you click on data agent, and if it doesn't work, there are two reasons for that. One is either your workspace is not tied to a Fabric capacity or not tied to Power BI Premium capacity, or data agent, there are certain settings within the admin portal that are not enabled. So if we go to data agent, there is just one setting here, but that setting that needs to be enabled. By the way, Fabric Data Agent is a GA feature now. So it used to be that you had to go to the tenant settings and enable a few things, but not anymore. So that's a whirlwind tour of what Fabric is. And then within the context of all of that, what happens is you have, let's say, data that you pull from somewhere, from your operational data, from elsewhere or within Fabric itself, where you have a lake house, and then let's say the lake house, and the lake house has the data. And now your job as a developer, in the past you would create a Power BI report, but now with AI, you have the ability to use all of these different data sources, or you to use all this data and then create an agent on top of this data so that consumers can go and chat with it. So let's take a look at how that would look like. So I would go to a new item and then click on data agent. And then I'll give it a name and then click on create. And now you need to add the data, right? So you go to data, add source, and this is where you'll see the entire data catalog, OneLake catalog, and all the data that you have access to. And you can go to any of the workspaces that you know where the data lives, or I can go to like pick a semantic model or pick a lake house or pick a warehouse. And then in this case, I'll just go ahead and add a semantic model, for example. Or maybe let's just pick a lake house. I'll pick a lake house. And then, so if you keep the slide that I was showing in your mind, the first step is for you to add the data source, right? So we just added the data source, which it will show up after validation. Now you have the data source. Now the main important part here is now you need to start adding the context, right? And so what does the context mean in this case is you would first, for example, I'm creating this data agent, but let's say this data agent suppose needs to be about, I don't know, some support tickets and then some users. And that's pretty much it. There is nothing more that I want to focus on. We can expand it out here and then see there is a support ticket and then there is a user ID. And then there is a user table with user ID here. Now, the data agent doesn't know a whole lot what we are creating, and that's where your domain expertise, that's where your knowledge, and then your company information and company context, your project context, all of that comes in, where you as the person would literally treat this data agent as an intern. You tell the data agent, okay, what it needs to be good at, or what the questions that it needs to answer. So we'll go to setup, and in the setup, I'll first give it instructions where I'll say you are an expert in answering questions related to tickets, and that's pretty much it. And then there is a data source instruction where you would define what this data source is about. So this data source, in my case, is data related to tickets submitted by users, and then we have submitted by users, and then the data source instruction. We haven't told the data agent what is the data that it has access to. Now you can always completely ignore this stuff and then just fly blind and create your data agent. There is nothing preventing you from doing that. But to create this data agent that is grounded in your data, grounded in your domain knowledge, domain expertise, your own expertise, and your own experience, um, and it is accurate, you want to add all these different things here, right? So let's assume you add all that, and then now your data agent is ready. Now I can go and ask questions. How many tickets are there? And then what's happening here is when you ask the question, it will connect to that data source. It will grab the context from here, grab the data source. So now it created this, hey, count the total number of support tickets, and then it will go create a SQL query and get the answer back, 4192, and then it will give me the answer. Hey, there are 4,192 support tickets, and then you as the creator have the option to expand the run steps here and then see and figure out if the answer that was given is correct or not correct.
So quick, Sandeep, we've got a couple questions. They're actually really good questions. So Aman says, I don't know how about how much or how to size capacities, but this makes me wonder how much extra load users will put on the system when asking the agent things. So for instance, and so I think the heart of the question is this inference, is the agent compute, is that counting against your F SKU? How is that monitored?
Yeah,
How is that? How does that work?
Yep, yeah, perfect. Yeah, so if anything that you touch in a fabric workspace always consumes capacity, and the capacity is, if you're familiar with Fabric, Greg, you mentioned that F SKUs, right? And when you purchase a Fabric capacity, it comes, you can assign a Fabric F64 or F2 or F8, depending on that. That is the amount of Fabric capacity units that you get. Now, when you use a data agent, the data agent is built based on number of tokens. So tokens meaning you ask a question and then you get the response back. All of that is text. That text is converted into numbers. Those are the tokens. That is done for the LLM. LLM doesn't understand words and numbers. It understands these tokens, and that's how it processes everything. So depending on number of the overall context that goes in with each question, and that context would be the size of the schema, not the data itself. Where the data agent doesn't care, you have 1 million rows, 100 rows, or 100 terabyte, 100 trillion rows. It doesn't matter. What matters is how much. So what is the schema size? Meaning, how many tables are you adding? How many columns are that are in each of the tables? And then if it's a semantic model, how many measures are there? Because all of those names, the name itself, not the, if all the measures are named A, B, C, D, E, F, G, then not much. But if there is, schema that is super large, complex, that's going to increase your overall token size, and then the responses that are generated. So I asked a question and the response here is, hey, there are, whatever, this is a token. So based on that, overall token is what is going to consume the Fabric capacity that you have. On top of that, you also have to execute the query, right? So this is the T-SQL query that is generated. It has to be run against the T-SQL endpoint, the lakehouse. So what is the cost associated with that? If you can take this, and when you deploy this, we are not going to charge you by the number of people who are going to access. From that point onwards, it depends on how they interact and how much they interact, which will generate the tokens, and then that's what will consume your capacity. And you can go to your capacity metrics app to figure out who's asking the questions and how much capacity is consumed. You can start with a data agent even at the F2 paid capacity. There is no limit on it. And then even at F2, if your purpose serves it, doesn't matter how many users are using it, as long as you have enough capacity left, enough juice left in your capacity to support those users. Hope that answers the question. Any other question, Greg?
Okay.
Okay, to move on, Greg.
Sandeep, I had another question since Greg. I don't know.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I was
that's fine
this whole time. Sorry, go ahead. The person who had another question, go ahead.
Yeah, when you were talking about explaining your data, there was that screen you were on, where you would sort of tell the system what kind of data you have. But I've been hearing a lot about, like, hey, make your data AI ready. I feel like that's kind of, you see that all over the place.
Yep.
And I don't know what that means. I think it means put metadata in, right? Like put descriptions on your columns and your tables. So does that mean this agent would read those descriptions?
Yep.
Correct. Excellent
Aman,
question.
You were literally touching on what I was saying while on mute. And that is, I think Sandeep made a great point, right? Like the Fabric Data Agent is looking at schema complexity. It's looking at metadata, right? So when people say, oh, like, is the AI actually ingesting my data? No, it's not, right? And so Sandeep, in that thought of, the Fabric Data Agent, when it's like producing the actual like data result in the query, the data is never actually touching the model and getting ingested, correct? It's only that metadata and the schema.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so that is, to your point, Aman, what does it mean getting data ready? It's the structure, it's the schema, it's the metadata, right? Correct. Of course, data quality is still important, but, and I think data quality, data governance, that's like, I would think more obvious. I think what's less obvious to folks is structure and metadata.
Yep, and that is a great pivot as well to what I want to actually focus more on, because to the question that was just answered or asked here, like how do you prepare your data so that it can be used, how to make it AI ready and everything. So to answer that, I think what will help is to first understand how the data agent actually works. And then once I explain this, you will understand exactly how to prepare your data to answer those questions. Now, I'm going to take an example of a semantic model here. Now, I showed you Lakehouse, but I'll show you the semantic model, because the semantic model is what most of the developers use. And also, there is a bit more nuance to how a semantic model works with a data agent so I think it will be good for you to understand that, but that can be extended to any other data source as well. So in a semantic model, let's say you're a user and then you want to use this. This user wants to use this semantic model as a source in the data agent, right? They've added the semantic model and then they ask a question. So the user is number one here. They ask a question. Hey, what was my TMS last quarter? Now, as soon as that goes into the data agent, think about a good analogy here. Think about as like what an executive has been asked that question. Hey, what was our TMS last quarter by somebody? That person, that manager or an executive, he probably doesn't know the answer. So he would go to his direct report. So the managers that report to him, or an intern that reports to him, and then he goes there and says, "Hey, what was the TMS last quarter? Because I want to know about that." And so the person who he's going to give it to, it could be he may give it to multiple people or he may give it to just one person, but that person is going to look at that question and then figure out, okay, what did I was just asked, right? So what was the TMS last quarter? So he has to figure out TMS means something. If he or she they're not aware, if they don't know what TMS means, they will ask a question or they'll assume. Let's suppose they assume something. They also have to figure out what last means and what quarter means. Last could be maybe they are just chatting with each other and they mentioned 2020, and then last could be like last year that I just mentioned within the context of their chat, or last could be literally the last, like the very last year, and then quarter, it could be a financial quarter, it could be a calendar quarter, it could be any other like 445 quarter, it doesn't matter, some sort of a quarter, right? So that person has to figure out what that means, and that figuring out piece is what the agent needs to know. Like, how do I figure out this question, that what was the TMS last quarter, and then after that those assumptions have been validated or maybe assumptions have been made, they will take that question and then figure out how to answer that question. So let's take hypothetically again, what was the TMS last quarter? Maybe within whatever the context is, it gets translated or paraphrased into calculate total marketing spend, TMS, in quarter 3 of financial year 2025. Okay, Now, where does that part come in? We will see that, but that is the question that is paraphrased based on the original question that's asked. Now we take that question and then pass it to an intern or a manager to figure out the answer. And that is done by a tool. So in this whole agentic AI system, you first have an orchestrator. Orchestrator is like a manager whose job is to intake, like take everything and then figure out what to do with that question and then give it to these little minions that report to him to figure out the answer. So he'll take that question, and now in this case, because we are using a semantic model, there is a DAX generation tool. So he'll send it to the DAX generation tool, and now the job of the DAX generation tool is to take that question and then generate a DAX, because that's how we are going to get the data, right? So it will create the DAX off of the semantic model that we added based on the context, and then execute that query, the DAX query, get the data out and send it back to the manager who will take it, synthesize it, and then answer that question back, right? So keep that the whole cycle in mind. Now let's go step by step. What does it mean, right? So what I'll do is if I go to the data agent now, and I have this data agent here, and I'll ask the question, what was my
really quick,
TMS?
Sandy?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to pause you. There was a few more questions. Do you want to do this prompt and then let's go to the question, or?
Anything that doesn't matter. We can take the question as I'm going to.
Okay, so the question is, and there's a couple of them. If there are limits or best practices, like what is recommended for structuring workspaces?
Yep.
Is it better to organize by business domain, data sensitivity, or another pattern? As the number of data sources grow, what strategies are recommended to maintain the accuracy and performance of the data agent?
Yeah, perfect. Good. Good question. So we will answer that by going to the data agent, and I'll progressively show you and you'll get the answer here. So I'll go to the data agent here and then go to the instructions and make sure there is nothing in the instruction. Agent instruction. This is the published one, and then get rid of it. And ask the question, what was my TMS last quarter? And it's going to go now. The first thing that you will notice when I ask that question is, what was my TMS last quarter? If I zoom in a bit here, not sure if you see it, but that got paraphrased by the orchestrator as what was the total TMS, as in total monetary sales in the last quarter. And which is not what I intended. My goal was to ask, hey, what was the total marketing spend and not the TMS? So which means that the orchestrator, the agent, it didn't understand and it doesn't have the context of what I was asking. So your job now is to add the context. And the way you would do that is to go here and then say agent instruction for questions related to TMS. TMS is equal to total marketing spent. And now I'll go back and then ask the question here, what was TMS last quarter? And hopefully it will pick that up right away, that my question was about a total marketing spend. It will look that up and then give you the answer back. In this case, there is no marketing related data in what I'm using, but it does translate that now what was the TMS last quarter. So in terms of the best practice, right? So the first thing that you will do when you are using the data agent is, when you are asking the question, always look at how the query was translated, which is you would go to this run step here and then see how it was paraphrased from the original question to what the orchestrator created. Now, if it tells you, if it generates a wrong paraphrased query, then you know exactly where to fix it, right? That needs to be fixed in the agent instruction, which is where your context will grow. So the first best practice here is to always don't just go and look at the answer that is generated by the data agent, but actually open the run step and always look at the paraphrased query, and then figure out if it was able to pick up your context or it was not able to pick up your context. And then based on that, you would add instructions. One of the things that I see that's done very, very often is users will go to like Copilot, open a Copilot on the side, or go to like Chat GPT or somewhere, and then they'll just say, hey, I'm creating a data agent, and this is what my data looks like, and this generates some instructions for me. And that's a wrong way to do that. It will do a really good job of giving you really long, complex, verbose instructions that you can just stick it in and you'll feel that, okay, it's working. But the question that was asked earlier, right? How does the data agent consume the capacity? If you just put in a lot of instructions in here, those instructions are going to get translated to tokens and you will consume your capacity, and it will also add to the overall latency, because the more stuff you add in the agent instruction, the more the orchestrator has to think, reason over it, understand it, and then respond you back. So always make sure that the agent instructions are very, very intentional. And the things that you would put in the agent instructions are things like this abbreviation that I used, right? So you'll have to work with your users of data agent, like what are some of the things that they usually ask for? Are there any common terms that they use? Are there any KPIs? What do those KPIs mean? And then on top of that, again, like I said, this orchestrator, the first layer in the data agent architecture, has to decide which tool to use, meaning who to go to answer the question, to get the data back. So imagine if you have multiple data sources that you've added. So there is a bakehouse related data here. Let me add that. Bakehouse is some company. And then there is e-commerce data, right? So I can go to agent instruction and then say for franchisee related questions, use the bakehouse, lake house, and the franchisee table in it. So you are explicitly telling the data agent what to use, and this is a good use of the agent instructions. So the things that you would add in the agent instructions are like routing, like how a question should be routed, to which data source it should go to. You would add like the formatting, meaning when you get the response back, what should it format with? So I can ask something like, when you are unsure about an acronym, ask clarifying question, which is always good, because then what is blah, blah, blah. Because that is good, because that is also part of your job as adding the context that how this data agent should respond back. If there are things that it doesn't understand, it will just make up stuff because it is an LLM. But then you have to train it and tell it like what is it, right? So in this case, it came back and say, I don't know what this means, so you have to help me with this particular question. Make sense? Now, the question about prep for AI, and then what are the best practices regarding doing this? So, which is where we will go next. So now that we understand what the agent's job is, the orchestrator's job is, we'll go to the next step, which is the tool itself, which is where the schema matters. Now, what the orchestrator will do is it will take that paraphrased question, the entire schema and everything that has been added, the instructions and all that stuff, and it will take it to the DAX generation tool, where the DAX generation tool will look at the schema, like what the measures that are added, tables that are added, columns that are added, and then it has to figure out that the question was asked, what was the total marketing spend? So for you to do the tool to do that, it has to look at the schema, and then based on the schema, it will try to create the DAX query. And now your job is to make sure that the tool, which is an LLM, has enough context and that it is able to pick the right columns, right objects from the semantic model or from your lake house to create the right query to answer that question, right? So what does that mean for a semantic model? That means for the semantic model, if I create a column or a measure that has the actual KPI called total marketing spend. But if I name that column as ABCDEFG, then the data agent, the tool itself is not going to know what that means. Even if your DAX code is right, your DAX query is written correctly, you add comments inside of the DAX itself, the tool and the data agent, it always goes by the schema. And the schema in this case is column names, table names, measure names, and all that stuff. It never looks at your data. It never looks at any of the DAX that's written. It never looks at any of the DAX measure definitions either. It always goes by the schema. But then plus on top of that schema, it also has access to additional metadata of the semantic model as well. So in case of the semantic model, if you're aware, you can go to a semantic model and then click on a table, and then you will see that there is a table description. I can go one step down and then look at a column, and then column has a description. It also has a synonym. So this is where you can add all your context. So the question earlier was like, where do I add all that stuff, right? That this is the table, this is the column, and all of that. In case of the semantic model, the best place to do that is in the semantic model itself. What you do not want is to add really, really verbose instructions. Your goal is to use or minimize the amount of instructions that are given for two reasons. One, it is used meant only for steering purposes, to guide the LLM, to guide the model, to answer the question the way it needs to be answered. And then two, you want to reduce the overall context that's added, because then that will reduce your capacity usage and reduce your overall context. So keep that in mind. So when you're creating a semantic model, the first and the biggest lever, the most important lever that you have in terms of preparing the semantic model or your lakehouse tables or warehouse tables or any other data source that's added to the data agent, the biggest lever you have is a really clean schema, which is extremely important. Now, if you're a Power BI developer, and if you have developed Power BI reports in the past, like I have, who cares, right? Because there can be revenue, and then there can be 15 different measures that begin with the name revenue. And one is called revenue base, another is called revenue dollars, another is called revenue blah blah blah. Now think about it from the LLM perspective. It's going to look at the schema, and now the question is about, let's say, revenue. It sees 20 different things that are all named similarly, revenue. And now your job is to help the LLM pick the right schema, right object from that entire context. And that's your whole job as a person who is creating these data agents. So think about the ways you can do that. The very first one that you can do is just rename it. Where, let's say, you have a measure that's called 15 different ways, like revenue. Then you can rename those measures and keep only the measure that is supposed to be used as revenue, and then everything else as something else. Now, in practice, that's not very practical, because you have downstream reports, you have downstream dependencies, and you cannot just go and rename everything. And that's where the descriptions help. You can add a description for a measure to say, use this if there are 15 measures. You can specifically say in the description that when a user asks a question about that is related to revenue, use this measure and don't use any other measures. And then similarly, for all the other measures, you can add the same thing, that don't use this measure and so forth.
So
now the descriptions
Sandeep,
are, yeah.
There's another question I think kind of dovetails into this.
Yeah.
Which Seb was asking, does Copilot work/understand the preview feature of calendar-based time intelligence in the semantic models? And Seb, I think what you meant by Copilot, are you meaning the Fabric Data Agent, or do you mean Power BI Copilot specifically? If you want to come off mute, you can.
Yeah, I meant Copilot specifically, since this feature is quite important, and for fiscal calendars, I was wondering. Yeah.
Yep. No, absolutely. So the Copilot and the data agent, they use the same or similar DAX generation tool, and then more or less they behave the same way, like how from orchestration or from steps perspective and how it processes and everything, it's very similar. So yes, it understands time intelligence. It knows the DAX generation tool. It knows what time intelligence functions are, like YTD, MTD, QTD, same period last year, then all of those different things. The DAX generation tool is aware of all of those things. Now,
okay, and I meant more about there's a new feature that's called calendar-based time intelligence. You can create a separate calendar by creating different. It's a new feature of the past few months.
Yep.
And so it's more on this one. Yeah. This is supported. Yeah. Okay.
So it is. So from the DAX perspective, you create a calendar and then you create relationships with your fact tables. That's how you use it, right? So it is aware of those features. It's aware of those calendars. It's aware of the relationships, and then it can use it based on that. So it's absolutely can use that. Now there are certain DAX functions that it is not aware of, or I would say objects that it is not aware of, like calculation groups. It's not aware of that. DAX UDFs, it's not aware of that. You can still steer it. You can add instructions, and then it will do a really good job of figuring that out, and then using those objects in the DAX generation process. But in general, your goal is to minimize the thinking that the DAX generation tool has to do. And I'll give you an example of that. So let's say you have a date table, and the date table has a column called is weekday. And if there is a question, for you and me, it's easy to figure out, right? So if there is a question, hey, give me a revenue for weekend, then I can just do a calculate, use the revenue measure, and then do a not equal to a weekday, and that will give me a weekend, right? But then that's one step that the agent had to go through and then create that DAX, however simple it is. But if you just simply added another column that says is weekend, now you just made your agent's job easy, because it can just look at the schema and it's clear enough that is weekday is available. So I can just use that. Same thing with measures as well. That if you, let's say there is a revenue measure, but then within your company, somebody may also say, hey, net sales, or some other thing. In reporting world, we wouldn't create multiple measures with the same DAX definition. That's you can't. You can, but the best practices you don't want to do that. But for a data agent, if you think about it from the data agent perspective, it doesn't look at the DAX. It looks at the schema. So which means that if you create multiple measures, that will help the data agent pick that measure within the context of like the question that is asked. You made the data agent's job much easier. Also, the data agent is aware of, or the DAX generation tool rather, is aware of relationships. It absolutely knows how the relationships work and everything. But if you're creating, if you already have a semantic model where you're doing like stuff that is required for making the reports more dynamic, like field parameter or disconnected tables, where you're doing really dynamic switching, using switch statements, using use relationships, tree tags, and really complex stuff, which is often required for creating reports to make them more dynamic and user friendly. But the data agent doesn't think that way. The data agent thinks in terms of star schema. It thinks about relationships, thinks in terms of the schema names and its etc. Right. So the question earlier was like, how do we prepare the semantic model, or how do we prepare the data for AI? This is how you prepare the data for AI, where you make the schema extremely clean, you name the columns very clean, you only select the stuff that is required for the scope of the data agent. So if my scope of my data agent is, let's say, only answering questions that are related to revenue, and if there is a marketing related stuff in here, and then some other inventory related stuff in the semantic model or in your lake house, then you wouldn't select that. You shouldn't select that, because by now it should be obvious why, right? Because we want to limit the scope, limit the number of tokens that are generated that would be wasteful, and all of those things. So hope that answers the question in terms of like what the process looks like. Now, yeah. Now, for the data for semantic models, I see there is a hand up. Yeah, go for it.
Hey, thank you for this. I just want to ask, like, if we have multiple end users that's supposed to use this agent, and actually those users are actually have different purpose. Like, say, for example, software engineers, support team, mechanical engineer. So they have different purpose, and so they're using different data. Should we use this? Should we select all this data, or should we create different agents? What is
different agents. The more you limit the scope of the data agent, the better. So if you have users who are asking about software, hardware, and those are different people and different types of questions, then the best way to tackle this is to create different agents. And then in Copilot Studio, you can create like a multi-agent, or in Foundry, you can create a multi-agent architecture where, depending on just like what data agent does, right? In data agent, when you ask a question, it will pick the right data source to answer that question. So you add another layer on top of that, where you create multiple different data agents, and then you create another orchestrator which will take the question and then say, hey, this is related to software, so it should go to this data agent versus that data agent. And it doesn't restrict yourself to just the data agent. It could be an agent that's built for some data in SAP, for example. Right. So depending on that, it will you can route it accordingly. But always be very conscious and be purposeful about what is added to the data agent.
I see. Thank you so much. Just a follow-up, very quick last question.
Yeah.
So you said like the orchestrator. So when you start building, do you need to start building by the orchestration and then you go to the agent, or basically you start you develop the agent and then you develop the orchestrator?
Correct. That's the right order to do it, because when you create the data agent, you first will have to decide and go through the process of identifying the right schema, the data sources, whether do you need to rename it, whether you need to add the instructions, whether you need additional data, whether you need to validate that data agent. And all of that should be done at the data agent layer first, to make sure that you've created valid and validated data agent. And then you would go to the orchestration layer and add an orchestrator, and then develop it from that point onward. But always start with the data first, then the data agent, and then go one step up after that.
And Sandeep, there's one more question in the chat before I let you continue, but I'd love all this engagement, by the way. Thank you, everybody, for all your engaging questions. This is an awesome use of everybody's time. So Aman was asking, oftentimes when people are interacting with the AI, they end their prompt with something like, what questions do you have for me before proceeding? Is there a way to insert that into the process with the data agent? And that resonates with kind of what you were saying, Sandeep, like even at the measure level, saying like, hey, only use this measure. Like you were pretty verbose in that measure, right?
Yeah.
And then Aman goes on to say, often I follow a convention of copying the definition of a measure into the description. Seems like a bad approach from this perspective. What do you think?
Correct. Exactly. So, so there are two different things in here, right? So what we talked about, always look at first the follow the chain where you ask the question, see if the orchestrator picked it or not, and then go one step after that. So what you would do is you would go to the data agent. So let's see.
Yeah,
I go to the
just want to
data.
say, Sandeep, I like when you showed in the markdown how you like gave it instructions, say ask, that like what you wrote, what you were unsure about an acronym, ask, clarifying. I think that's a good way to address it, is to put it in the agent instructions.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can be, in fact, be more granular about it as well. That you can say, let's say I add in here that revenue for revenue related questions, always ask revenue by what quarter or revenue by what year or something along those lines, so that when the user asks that question, you always get always have the agent come back with something. And sometimes it can be frustrating that, hey, I told you, and I don't want you to ask that question anymore. But those sort of personalizations that are not available yet, but at least you have that lever. You can go to the agent instructions, add based on your user acceptance testing, add those little things in here so that you can do that. So the question that I asked here, right? So the way you would go about doing this is we looked at how it was paraphrased. The next step after that is if there are multiple different data sources. So let's see if this picks up here, right? So I'll ask what was how many franchises? How many franchisees? And then hopefully, because I said for all the franchise related stuff, it needs to go to the bake house. So it picked that up, right? So it went to the lake house at how many franchises are there in the bake house, lake house. And it picked that up from what I added here. So if you have multiple different data sources, you would follow that process where you ask the question, then you look at how it was paraphrased, then you would look at was it routed correctly to the right table or right data source. If it is not to the right data source, you would add the instruction. Then if it is it's gone to the right data source, then you would look at how the query was created, whether it is a DAX query or whether it is a semantic model, how the query was created, and then did it pick the right stuff from that data source. If it did not pick it from the right data source, then you would add the data source level instructions and add more column descriptions and measure descriptions and all that stuff. So before I forget, and this is extremely important, that for semantic models, at least, when you go to the semantic model, there is a prep for AI. And this is part that's often missed. And I would kick myself if I didn't show you that. So in the semantic model, there is a prep data for AI. Well, actually, if you go to the data agent, for when you add the data lakehouse as a data agent source, there you will see a data agent instruction and data source description and instruction. And there is an example queries where you can add example queries. So if my example queries are how many franchisees, then I can add a SQL example for that. So when the tool is thinking about it, it has an example to follow, like a few short example to follow, like what you would do in ChatGPT, right? You perhaps sometimes just copy paste something and say, follow this exact same thing. So similar to that, it will follow those examples and then create the right query. So that's also part of adding the context. But in this case, notice that I added a lakehouse and I added a semantic model. But in the setup, I don't see the semantic model. And the reason for that is for the semantic model only, you have to go to the semantic model and then you have to go to prep data for AI. And for prep data for AI is where you would add all those things. So for semantic model, you have to go to prep data for AI and you go to follow the steps. You go to the simplified data schema, only select the tables and columns and measures that you want to make this part of the overall context. Go to the verified answer. Verified answer is where you would create a phrase. So let's say in this case is total. This is my visual from the report, and then what is the total revenue? And then you associate that phrase or that prompt with that visual. So when the user asks a question, hey, what was my total revenue? It knows that it needs to follow the visuals or the columns and the measures that are associated with that visual. So it can easily grab that without having to think about it. And that's a one way to increase your accuracy as well as lower your latency, because this is available. So data agent doesn't have to think and it can just use that. And this part is often missed or not used by users and customers, because one, they don't go through that exercise and they don't understand like what is the value of doing that. But I can tell you that it is extremely important to add verified answers because it can help you with that grounding. And then lastly, the AI instructions, right? So this AI instruction, often the confusion is what is the difference between this AI instruction and the instruction that you see in the agent instruction. All you have to do is keep in mind again this diagram. Like, what are we trying to do here? The agent instruction is for the agent orchestrator. So incoming question, understanding it, and then passing it on. The prep for AI instruction is for DAX generation, like what we discussed. Once it gets the question from the orchestrator, the job of the prep for AI is to provide the context to generate the DAX query, right? So something like here that I say, hey, for product related questions, always use this particular column and don't use the other column that's in here. Something like this wouldn't go in the agent instruction because the agent doesn't know anything about your overall schema. The agent doesn't know this. This piece is used for DAX generation, right? So you would ask or add this in the AI instructions. Also, things like for revenue related purpose or for year-to-date calculations, use measures that have suffix YTD in them, so that it can follow that pattern. You can just look for YTD related measures and use that. If you have DAX UDF or if you have really specific DAX patterns that it needs to follow, let's say, for example, treat as, or you have role-playing dimensions, and so you need to use like use relationships and that kind of stuff. You can stick that into the AI instructions, not in the agent instruction, the AI instructions in here, so that it can generate the DAX. So how do you decide again whether to go in the AI instructions or it should go in the agent instruction? Will be based on what is the purpose. Now, the best place to add a lot of this thing is in the semantic model itself. Yeah, go ahead.
Will Copilot be able to, or the data agent or Copilot be able to see columns that are marked as hidden when it's generating DAX?
It can see that. If you have columns that are hidden or that are selected but hidden, it can still see that. But if there are columns, so let's a good example is, let's say this the customers, right? Or not even customers, maybe products. Yeah, good example is a products. So let's take an example of the products. In case of the products, I like what we usually do, we hide the product ID, like the foreign keys and the primary keys, right? And so I hid it, and then I deselected it from my schema. Now, why did I deselect it? Now, even if it is deselected from here, it is still part of your overall semantic model, meaning this product ID column is used for relationships. So it is part of the overall semantic model. But there is not going to be any DAX that will be generated off of that product ID. right? We won't be using like a sum or average of the product ID. So it doesn't make sense to select this schema as a part of your AI schema. So that's how you would think about it. Now, if there are columns that are hidden, but will be required to answer certain questions, then you should select those as a part of your schema. Now, the nuance part here is how the verified answer works. If you use a visual that uses a if you use a visual that uses a hidden measure or a hidden column, the DAX generation tool is actually not able to see that. It uh, so it is aware that it is there, but in the verified answer purposes, it won't be able to see that. So I would say in general, the good practice is include it or unhide it, but then deselect if it is not part of the scope of the data agent, if that makes sense. Any other questions, Greg?
Made sense to me. Seb, I see you're typing. Yep, you got a thumbs up as well.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so add the AI instructions, right? So, and this is where you would add the stuff related to your DAX generation query. So now you've created the DAX, you've prepped your semantic model, you've added your everything in here. One thing to keep in mind is the descriptions help a lot. So like don't skip on the descriptions. And what we discussed, like descriptions are not for human consumption or human understanding. The role of the adding the descriptions here is for an LLM to pick that schema and then add the descriptions accordingly and keep the description length less than 200 characters. Anything that's added after 200 characters is ignored. So make sure that it is only within the 200 characters, and then be purposeful about it, meaning that this delivery days is used for whatever, but that's how you add. You won't add like Bob added delivery days because we had this problem, or this measure is calculated by using this, whatever, right? That is not the purpose. The purpose is for an LLM to understand when to use it, when to not to use it. Another purpose of adding the descriptions is, remember what we said, right? It never looks at the data. It doesn't know what the data is. So which means, let's say if I have a column that is called states, US states, then then the US states are all abbreviations like ORPA, CA for California, and not the actual names. The data agent doesn't know that. So you can add the description that the state names are abbreviated, such as, for example, CAOR, and these are US states. That is also important. So the semantic model that I have here is for Brazil. So I would add that these are Brazil states from Brazil with and abbreviated as SPOP, NP, something like that. So the data agent understands that context. Now you can always add this stuff in the instructions. There is nothing preventing you from doing that. But the more you add at the data source level, the better it is. So that you don't have to add it in the instructions and use the instructions more for steering purposes. Okay. So we do that, and then to go back here, this is just more to show like the orchestrator will split the question and then choose different data sources depending on what the question is. So here, if it is a question about like inventory and sales, and that resides in two different data sources, it will pick the right one and then route it and then get the answer back. And then it will reason over that and then summarize the answer and give the answer back. So these are just some of the best practices that we talked about. Now, in case of the Lakehouse, so this is for the Lakehouse warehouse. For the Lakehouse warehouse, important thing to keep in mind is you can add like a Lakehouse table or a warehouse table directly. But again, if you're using something from a gold table, then you probably use things like gold underscore revenue underscore something something. But you can create views. So it is better to create views and then drop the columns that you don't need. Maybe rename those columns as well to make it more LLM friendly. You can add more columns that you need as well, and things like that. So I would say from Lakehouse Warehouse perspective, it is better to use views so that you have more control over it and then use the views directly. And then also because this the view the because we are going to query the SQL endpoint, make sure that you do your due diligence in terms of optimizing the data layout, and then not stuff too much into it and all of those things. So all the things that will make a SQL endpoint faster, and same thing applies to the semantic model as well. Anything that will make the semantic model faster to answer for a DAX. So go through the DAX optimization process, follow the best practices for DAX, and all that. Now, this stuff is already captured in a semantic model best practices for data agent article that I wrote. If you scroll all the way down here, all the way down, so that includes the pitfalls and all that, there is a checklist that you will find handy. So click on that and it will go to a checklist where this is for the semantic models, where what you should do when you're using the semantic model as a data source. And it will just follow this top to down, top to bottom, and you'll be in a really good shape of using and succeeding with the data agents. There is also a notebook in the same article, a notebook where shows you how to use the semantic model, use the BPA, which is the best practices analyzer. There is also, if I scroll down, the column name descriptions. If you have, columns that are very similarly named, if there are columns that do not have any descriptions, and then there is an example of how to use the data agent SDK for evaluation purposes. Now, for evaluation, I'll show you one more thing that you'll find helpful is add it in the description or in the chat, but there is a DAX, let's see, data agent LLM as judge, and let me copy that and then put it in the chat here. And then, so this one is helpful for the purposes of setting up the evaluations for the notebook. So instead of asking questions manually, as a developer, you would ask questions you programmatically using a notebook, using Python. Just follow this, and then it will tell you, okay, your data agent is 75% accurate. And then you would go through the process of identifying, okay, what do you need to change? Do you need to add context, remove context, update context, add, change, remove schema, and all of those things that we've been talking about. Okay. I saw there was a hand up.
Yes. This is me. So thank you for. I just have a question about when you talk about the the AI instructions. There is I want just you to talk a little bit about how you can for MCP can they replace the AI instructions when it comes to like did they need to connect to certain data, or did they need to reason about what exact instructions they need to follow or not?
Okay, so I don't follow that. So MCP, so there are two MCPs. So are you talking about the data agent MCP, or are you talking about the Power BI MCP?
Data engineering.
Okay, so the data agent MCP, think about it as nothing but an API. So the exact same instructions that you are using, they follow. You send a question to the MCP, and the MCP, which is the data agent, will take that and answer that. The difference is, however, that MCP doesn't have an orchestrator. You ask a question, let's say, what is my revenue? It will give you an answer back based on the context that you've added. You don't have to add anything else. It's already in your data agent. It's part of your data agent. but then you ask a follow-up question to say, break it down by product category. You'll get an error back that I don't understand what you mean. Can you clarify? And the reason for that is there is no orchestrator when you're using the MCP. So the right way to do that is you would use something like LangGraph or something that will have some memory context for context management purposes, and then it will be able to understand that, where you will be able to follow up that, and the exact same thing that our orchestrator did, right, where it translated that query into something and then send it to the data agent. So the data agent will MCP will take that and then send the answer back to you. But you don't have to add the instructions and all of that stuff. That's already part of the data agent.
Thank you so much.
Okay. And then the last thing, I know we are almost at time here, that I want you to leave with is check out, like if you're using semantic models and everything, definitely check out the MCP servers that are available for data agent as well as for Power BI, OneLake, Lakehouse, and everything. So I have my VS Code here. I can ask my VS Code to connect to the local semantic model using MCP server, and then it will use that. It will connect to that. And then if you add the MCP, MS Learn MCP, it will actually go to that blog that I wrote. And then you can ask it, hey, scan my semantic model based on the best practices that are written in the in Microsoft Learn, and it will actually do a really good job of scanning your entire semantic model based on the best practices that I've written, and then give you a nice summary of what needs to be fixed and what you should do, and all that stuff. So that's a really handy way of speeding up your process and including that in your workflow, so that you can add the right context and optimize your overall data agent experience.